Hey there guys, in this video we'll learn the final method for solving quadratic equations algebraically, and this method is going to be called completing the square. So this method is useful whenever your quadratic equation won't factor, but when your leading coefficient is still 1 or -1. And that's because it's a little bit faster than using the quadratic formula once you get the hang of it, and it's going to help you come to your answers a bit more quickly than that when you can't factor. Okay, so you can see an outline of the steps for completing the square up here in this box, but I'm not really going to go over this here with you. I'm just going to start number 1 and kind of walk you through on a fresh problem. Okay, but you can look back at this once you get the hang of what completing the square looks like. So for completing the square, you always want to start with your constant term on the right side of the equation. So in this equation, we have x squared minus 20x plus 32 equals 0. And I'm actually going to subtract the 32 so that it's on the right side of the equation. So it's a little bit different from factoring because we don't want the right side set equal to 0. So we have a negative 32 over here. And then on the left side, I've got my x squared minus 20x. And then I'm going to leave a little bit of space, and I'm going to put in just this plus, and then I'm going to leave a blank here. I'm going to do the same thing on the right side, put in a plus and leave a blank there. Okay, and in that blank, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my b value here, which is a negative 20, and I'm going to take half of that. So I'm going to divide it by 2. So negative 20 divided by 2, and then I'm going to finally square that number. Okay, so I took the b value, negative 20, divided by 2, and then I'm squaring that. So let's think about what that would become. Negative 20 divided by 2 is really negative 10. And if we take negative 10 and square it, we get a positive number, positive 100. So really this number here is 100. So I'm going to put it in that form over here. So what I've done is I've kept this equation balanced because I've really just added 100 over here and I added 100 over here to the right side. Okay, so I haven't changed anything about the equation. I did the same thing to the left side as I did to the right side. But now, here's what this allows me to do. What I've created on the left side here is I've created a perfect square trinomial. Okay, a perfect square trinomial. And a trinomial is a perfect square trinomial if it meets the following conditions. If the first term is a perfect square, which it is, x squared is, x times x. And then the last term is a perfect square, which it is in this case, because we said negative 20 over 2 squared is just plus 100. 100 is 10 times 10. And if the middle term is twice this square root times this square root. So let's look at that. For this one, it's x times 10 times 2. 2 times x times 10 is 20x. Okay, so this is a perfect square trinomial, and this allows you to factor the perfect square trinomial into the following. This would be x minus 10 quantity squared. Okay, x minus 10 quantity squared. So that's what I'm going to do on the left side now. Okay, I'm going to take the fact that x squared minus 20x plus 100 factors into x minus 10 quantity squared and write it like this. Okay, x minus 10 quantity squared equals, over here on the right side, negative 32 plus 100. Negative 32 plus 100 is positive 68. Okay, so now that I have x minus 10 quantity squared over here, I can apply what I know about square roots, and I can take the square root of the left side, and what that square root will do is it will cancel out this exponent of 2. So taking the square root of this side will just leave me with an x minus 10. If I take the square root of the left side, then I have to take the square root of the right side. And remember, anytime we do a square root, we include a plus or minus sign. So this gives me x minus 10 equals plus or minus the square root of 68. Okay, so now to solve for x, I can add this 10 to the right side, and that gives me x equals 10 plus or minus the square root of 68. Now I don't know what the square root of 68 is off the top of my head, so I'm going to use a calculator, and I'm going to get two answers for this one because of that plus or minus sign. So we'll have one answer as 10 plus the square root of 68, and our other answer is 10 minus the square root of 68. So if I pull out my calculator, I can do 10 plus the square root of 68. 10 plus the square root of 8 is going to give me approximately 18.25, and then 10 minus the square root of 68 is approximately 1.75. Okay, so we get 18.25 and 1.75 for our answers for this problem. Okay, let's look at another problem, number 2. And again, I know this method probably seems like it's the most complicated of them all, and that's because it's new. So once you get the hang of this, it's actually pretty simple. Number 2, x squared plus 9x minus 136 equals 0. So again, we start by taking our constant term, and that's the negative 136, and putting it on the right side. So I need to add in this case. Add 136, add 136. So that gives me x squared plus 9x on the left side. On the right side, it gives me my positive 136, and then I'm also going to add in my blanks. So put a blank there and put a blank there. Okay, so now here's how we fill in the blanks. Again, we take half of our b value, so we take 9 and then divide it by 2, and we square it. Well, 9 halves squared is going to give us 81 over 4. 9 squared is 81, 2 squared is 4, so we're really adding 81 fourths to both sides. Okay? On the left side, again, all we're doing is we're factoring this trinomial using this little shortcut I showed you up here for number 1. And all that happens is, again, the square root of x squared is x. That's going to be our first term. The square root of 9 halves squared is just going to be 9 halves, okay? We're squaring 81 fourths, so, or we're squaring 9 halves to get 81 fourths, so the square root of 81 fourths is really just 9 halves. So that's going to be my second term, okay? This sign always determines what this sign down here is going to be. So this is x plus 9 halves quantity squared. Okay, that's all we're doing, but really we're factoring there, okay? We're factoring from here to here. 136 plus 81 fourths, you can use your calculator for that. If I do 136 plus 81 over 4, I get 625 over 4. So that's 625 fourths. Okay, now we can take the square root of both sides since we have this in factored form. So square root sign here, square root sign here, and we won't forget the plus or minus. So this gives us x plus 9 halves equals plus or minus, let's do that on the calculator, the square root of 625 fourths is going to be 25 halves. So this is x plus 9 halves equals plus or minus 25 halves. And then to solve for x, I need to subtract 9 halves from both sides. So that gives me x equals negative 9 halves plus or minus 25 halves. So that's going to give me, again, two answers, negative 9 halves plus 25 halves, and then negative 9 halves minus 25 halves. Negative 9 halves plus 25 halves is going to give me 16 over 2, which is just 8. and then negative 9 halves minus 25 halves, that would be negative 34 over 2, which is just negative 17. So we get two answers for this one, and that's negative 17 and positive 8. Okay, number 3, we have x squared minus 14x plus 16 equals 0. Again, I'm going to take my constant over to the right side, so subtract 16 from both sides. That gives me x squared minus 14x on the left side. And on the right side, I have my negative 16. I'll add in my blanks here and here. To fill in this blank, again, it's our b value, take half of it, negative 14 over 2, and square that. Negative 14 over 2 is negative 7, and negative 7 squared is positive 49. Okay, the left side, again, this is the part you really need to focus on. So, again, we're taking this first term, square root of x squared is x. This next term, remember this is really a 49, okay, and we have the square root of 49 already, okay, square root of 49 is this 14 over 2, which is 7. Okay, so really this number is always just the half of your b value. 14 over 2 is 7. And then, again, the sign in the middle is determined by this sign here. This is a minus, so then we put a minus here. This is x minus 7 quantity squared, and that equals negative 16 plus 49, which is 33. So x minus 7 quantity squared equals 33. I can now take the square root of both sides. So I get x minus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 33. And then to solve for x, we just add 7 to both sides. So that gives me x equals 7 plus or minus the square root of 33. So on your calculator, go ahead and do 7 plus the square root of 33 and 7 minus the square root of 33. Okay, 7 plus the square root of 33 gives us 12.74. And then 7 minus the square root of 33 is 1.26. 1.26 if we're rounding to the nearest hundredth. So we have 1.26 and 12.74 for our answers. Okay, last problem, number 4. I said that completing the square is nice whenever our leading coefficient is 1 or negative 1. Well, for this problem, our leading coefficient you see is 3, but look at your trinomial. It's 3x squared plus 6x plus 9. We can actually factor out a GCF of 3 at the very beginning of this problem. Okay, so if I do that, take out my GCF, then I'm left with x squared plus 2x plus 3 equals 0, and then I can divide by 3, and then I just get x squared plus 2x plus 3 equals 0 as my new equation. Okay, so now we can do completing the square on this equation here. What I want you to do is pause the video and see if you can do this on your own, since you've seen 3 examples. Okay, once you get your answer, click play and we'll check it. Okay, so let's check and see where you've gotten so far for this one. So we subtract 3 over to the right side to get x squared plus 2x on the left side, and then negative 3 on the right side. If we add in our blanks here, half of your b value would be 2 over 2, so that's 1, and 1 squared is also 1, so you get negative 3 plus 1 on the right side, which gives us negative 2. On the left side, this becomes x plus 1 quantity squared. Okay, x plus 1 quantity squared, what I have here in purple. Then I can take the square root of both sides. Notice on the right side, though, I'm taking the square root of negative 2. Well, we know from previous lessons that you cannot take the square root of a negative number, so because of this right here, this actually ends up being a no solution. Okay, as always, if you have any questions over this video, be sure to jot those down and we'll address those the next time I see you in class. Until then, have a nice day. You're all wonderful people.